On May 19, 1536, at precisely 8 a.m., a French executioner raised his sword above the neck of England's queen. Anne Boleyn, mother of the future Elizabeth I, the woman who changed the course of English history, was about to meet one of the most brutal ends ever faced by a royal. Anne Boleyn wasn't just Henry VIII's second wife, she was the woman who literally broke England away from the Catholic Church, sparked the English Reformation, and gave birth to one of England's greatest monarchs. Yet in less than 3 years, she went from beloved queen to condemned traitor, facing charges so outrageous that even Tudor England was shocked. Today, we're diving deep into the real story behind her execution, the political conspiracy, the fabricated evidence, and the chilling final moments of a woman who refused to go quietly. And if you're fascinated by the dark side of royal history, make sure to hit that subscribe button because we explore these hidden stories every week. To understand why Anne Boleyn's execution was so shocking, you need to know just how high she climbed, and how far she had to fall. Anne wasn't born to be queen. She was the daughter of a diplomat, educated in the sophisticated courts of France and Austria. When she returned to England around 1522, she was different from other court ladies, witty, intelligent, and unafraid to speak her mind. Most importantly, she knew how to play the game. When King Henry VIII noticed her, and did something unprecedented, she said no. While her sister Mary had already become the king's mistress, and refused to be just another royal conquest. For 7 years, she kept Henry chasing her, demanding marriage, not just an affair. And Henry was obsessed. So obsessed that he literally broke England away from the Catholic Church just to divorce his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, and marry Anne. Think about that, he risked civil war, international isolation, and religious upheaval for this woman. In 1533, Anne finally became Queen of England in a secret ceremony. The entire country held its breath waiting for her to produce the male heir Henry desperately needed. Instead, on September 7, 1533, she gave birth to a daughter, the future Elizabeth I. Henry was devastated. After everything he'd sacrificed, after turning England upside down, and had failed him. And in Tudor England, disappointing the king could be a death sentence. But here's where the story gets really dark, because Henry's disappointment was about to turn deadly. By early 1536, Henry VIII had a problem. He was desperately in love with Jane Seymour, one of Anne's own ladies-in-waiting, but he was still married to Anne. Divorce was out of the question, he'd already broken with Rome once, and doing it again would make him look ridiculous. The charges against Anne were so scandalous that even the gossip-loving Tudor court was stunned. First, adultery, not with one man, with 5 different men, including her own brother George Boleyn. Anne was also charged with treason, plotting the king's death so she could marry one of her lovers and rule England through him. And if that wasn't enough, whispers of witchcraft followed her, with some claiming she had used dark magic to seduce the king in the first place. Now here's what makes these charges absolutely ridiculous: the evidence. The prosecution claimed and committed adultery on specific dates when we know she was either heavily pregnant, recently given birth, or in completely different locations. For example, they said she was intimate with Mark Smeaton at Greenwich Palace on a day when court records show she was at Richmond Palace, miles away. The torture of Mark Smeaton is particularly chilling. He was the only one of the accused men to confess, but only after being brutally tortured by Cromwell's men. The other 4 men, including her brother, maintained their innocence even facing death. Just days before Anne's arrest, Henry was already negotiating his betrothal to Jane Seymour. The charges weren't justice, they were a legal execution order written in reverse. May 15, 1536. The Great Hall of the Tower of London had been transformed into a courtroom, but this wasn't going to be a trial, it was going to be a performance, and everyone knew how it would end. Anne Boleyn was brought before 26 peers of the realm, including her own uncle, the Duke of Norfolk, who would preside over her condemnation. Think about that. Her own family member was chosen to sentence her to death. The fix was in from the very beginning. It's remarkable that even while facing a rigged trial where the outcome was predetermined, Anne Boleyn refused to break. When the charges were read, adultery, incest, treason, she answered each one with dignity and intelligence that impressed even her enemies. "I am clear of all the offenses which you have laid to my charge," she declared. She systematically dismantled the prosecution's case, pointing out the impossibilities, the contradictions, the obvious lies. She spoke for 2 hours with such eloquence that even Thomas Cromwell, watching from the shadows, reportedly looked uncomfortable. The evidence presented was laughable. Love letters that were never produced. Witness testimonies from people who were either tortured or bribed. Dates that didn't add up. Locations that made no sense. The prosecution's star witness? Mark Smeaton, whose confession was extracted through torture so brutal that he could barely stand during his own trial. Anne's brother George faced an even more disgusting spectacle. He was accused of making jokes about the king's sexual inadequacy, jokes that, even if true, hardly constituted treason. When handed a piece of paper with the alleged comments, and told not to read it aloud, George boldly read it to the entire court, essentially daring them to condemn him for repeating their own accusations. The deliberation lasted less than an hour. Every single peer voted guilty. Her uncle Norfolk, tears streaming down his face, pronounced the sentence, death by burning or beheading, at the king's pleasure. Anne's response was what truly showed her character. She didn't beg, she didn't collapse, she didn't blame anyone else. Instead, she said, "I do not say that I have always borne toward the king the humility which I owed him, considering his kindness and the great honor he showed me, but God knows, and is my witness, that I have not sinned against him in any other way." Even in condemning herself to death, she maintained her innocence while taking responsibility only for not being humble enough. It was a masterclass in dignity under impossible circumstances. With the sham trial complete, all that remained was the execution itself. Despite facing death, Anne Boleyn had one final surprise that would shock Tudor England. May 19, 1536. Anne Boleyn's final dawn. For 3 days, Anne had been waiting in the Tower, and those who saw her during these final hours reported something extraordinary. She seemed almost relieved. The woman who had fought so hard for so long was finally at peace, knowing the end was near. Even in her final hours, Henry VIII managed one last act of cruelty. Instead of the traditional English axe, he had ordered a French swordsman from Calais, supposedly as a mercy because the sword would be quicker than an axe. Historians believe the real reason was far more sinister. Henry wanted to ensure there would be no last-minute reprieve. By the time a messenger could reach them to stop the execution, it would already be over. And spent her final night in prayer with her chaplain. She took communion at dawn and distributed alms to the poor, as was customary for condemned nobles. Her composure struck everyone. The French executioner himself later said he had never seen anyone face death with such dignity. At 8 a.m., Anne was led to Tower Green. Unlike the public executions at Tower Hill, this was private. Only about 30 witnesses were present, mostly court officials and foreign ambassadors. Henry couldn't risk a public execution where Anne might say something to turn the crowd against him. She was dressed simply in a grey damask gown with a white ermine mantle, the colors of mourning and purity. Around her neck she wore a pearl necklace that would soon need to be removed. What happened next became the stuff of legend. Anne stepped onto the scaffold and delivered what many consider one of the most remarkable final speeches in history. "Good Christian people, I am come hither to die, according to law, for by the law I am judged to die, and therefore I will speak nothing against it. I pray God save the king and send him long to reign over you, for a gentler nor a more merciful prince was there never. To me he was ever a good and gentle sovereign lord." By refusing to criticize Henry, she protected her daughter Elizabeth from any accusation of being the child of a treasonous mother. She then asked the small crowd to pray for her, removed her pearl necklace, and knelt down. A blindfold was tied around her eyes. The French executioner, who had been hiding his sword behind his back to avoid frightening her, stepped forward silently. "Jesus, receive my soul," were her final words. The executioner later said he had never performed a cleaner execution. With one swift stroke, Anne Boleyn's head was severed completely. She was 35 years old. The woman who had changed the course of English history was laid to rest like a common criminal, in a grave that remained unmarked for centuries. Anne's execution had consequences Henry never anticipated. Her daughter Elizabeth, the disappointing girl child, would become Elizabeth I, arguably England's greatest monarch, ruling for 45 years and ushering in the Elizabethan Golden Age. The woman Henry killed for failing to produce a male heir had actually given him the most successful ruler in English history. The Reformation that began with Henry's desire to marry and continued to reshape England long after her death, creating the religious and cultural foundation of modern Britain. Because here's the thing, Henry VIII thought he was erasing Anne Boleyn from history. Instead, he made her immortal. We're still talking about her nearly 500 years later, while most of Henry's other political victims are forgotten. The woman buried in an unmarked grave became one of history's most studied figures. The daughter he dismissed as a disappointment became England's Golden Age. The marriage he destroyed to make way for Jane Seymour ended up changing the course of Western civilization. And Boleyn won in the end, not through violence or revenge, but through legacy, through her daughter, and through the simple fact that the truth eventually surfaces, no matter how powerful the people trying to bury it. So, what do you think? Was Anne Boleyn's execution the greatest injustice in royal history? How do you think history would have changed if she had lived? Let me know in the comments below. And if you found this deep dive into Tudor history fascinating, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell.